Well, I just keep finding out things about this whole canvas mess that just keep, I think I've got my handle on canvas, that I understand canvas, and then it goes and shows me that I don't. For example, today's lesson, which is going to be short because I just found this out. So yesterday I went back and I pulled up a video that I had produced back in the spring um, about the Enlightenment, covering the same material we're going to cover today. I thought I'd save myself some work, and I put it in Canvas. And today, when I went back to look at it in Canvas, just to, I don't know, make sure it was there, see how far it got, when I clicked on it, it said that the video had been disabled by the owner. I'm the owner, but I guess they don't recognize me, the owner here, as me, the owner of my home. See, I recorded it back in the spring at home from my personal computer. Now, and it's not that I don't like talking to you guys, but I didn't think I was going to have to do this. But yeah. And so let's begin by talking about um, the religion of the Enlightenment, which was Deism, which is an interesting thing. So, and yeah, today's going to be short, guys. We were here. No, we were here. Yes. Now, as it says there, although we're a bit ahead of ourselves, let us look at the ideas in explaining religion from a standpoint of logic and reason. And see, when we talk about the Enlightenment, this is one of the things that is flawed about the Enlightenment. See, normally, I mean, you would think, okay, the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages were locked in, as we saw in that little video of Steve Martin, locked in ignorance and superstition and things of that nature, and then comes along the Enlightenment, using logic, asking questions, using scientific method, and you think, well, I mean, this is great. But no, the Enlightenment had flaws, and here is one of the major flaws, and that is that there are certain parts of the human experience that defy logic, that cannot be squared with logic. Remember that the whole emphasis of the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, was that everything could be, defined in terms of logic that fit within a box that was mathematically equitable, that you could be made to understand it. But there are certain things that don't. I mean, for example, human beings. So I like Star Trek. Star Wars too. I mean, I don't want to start a fight. But yeah, I like Star Trek. In Star Trek, there is, when Gene Roddenberry wrote that book, he included a character named Spock. Spock, and Mr. Arlinghouse is now laughing and rolling his eyes. Spock is a Vulcan. Vulcans were a race of humanoids in the Star Trek universe that are devoid of emotion, devoid of passion. Well, see, human beings aren't like that. Human beings are not logical creatures. You say, what do you mean, Mr. Horton? Of course, human beings are logical. Well, that's not true. There are certain things that human beings do that simply defy logic. For example, vengeance defies logic. There is no logic to vengeance. I mean, think about it. If someone injures you in some way, and then you go and injure them back, I mean, what have you done really? Have you fixed what they originally did? Did you, for example, if they hurt somebody that you cared about, did it take the hurt away from them? I mean, for example, let's pretend that Mr. Arlinghouse goes out and kills Bambi's mom in the forest. Well, you don't see, when Bambi grows up, Bambi doesn't try to hunt Mr. Arlinghouse down and kill him. Yeah, revenge and hatred and things like that don't really happen in nature. It's not natural at all. But human beings, do it. Not just vengeance, but also love. Love is entirely illogical. And I'm not talking about my different girlfriend. I'm talking about the idea that you would put somebody else's needs above your own needs. And that's love. And it's illogical, totally illogical. I'm going to go way off tangent here. One of my favorite stories is, and this is a writer that you need to become familiar with, Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens wrote many things, but his favorite story for me is obviously A Christmas Carol. Now, some of you may have seen it, read it, or whatever. I read it, and every version possible when it comes on television, I watch A Christmas Carol. And in A Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens, who is a romantic writer, and by the way, we're in the middle of the neoclassical movement right now with Romanticism. With the Enlightenment. The next artistic movement will be called Romanticism. Charles Dickens was a romantic writer, and in both A Tale of Two Cities and A Christmas Carol, he crushes the idea of logic. You see, because in the story A Christmas Carol, Ebenezer Scrooge, the old miser, is a perfect example of a logical person. What does Ebenezer Scrooge do? Ebenezer Scrooge takes care of Ebenezer Scrooge, which is a logical thing to do. But then Dickens, through his storytelling, through the Ghost of Christmas Past, Present, and Future, shows Dickens that functioning purely unlogical is something that can be highly immoral. You're never. For example, and I'll come visit this point again. But for example, when Ebenezer Scrooge goes to the corn market, in other words, where people buy and exchange grains, and he meets there with, of course, other merchants, and he then makes a very shrewd deal, and then he goes and he meets two guys who are trying to hit him up for charity, hit him up for money, and they want money from him, and he says, "Are there no workhouses? Are there no prisons?" And they say, "Well, yes, they are, but many would rather die than go to these workhouses and prisons." And Scrooge says, "Well, if they're going to die, then let them do it and decrease the surplus population." See, that is logical. In an overpopulated world where people are starving, if there are facilities available, and if they don't want to go there, then let them die and decrease the surplus population. That's logical until you meet one of those people who is dying of deprivations. Then suddenly your logic is, See, human beings don't operate on logic, okay? And another thing that doesn't operate on logic, religion, which is, now we're back online. So, the deism Deism, which is, you see there, deism is a logical approach to religion. Let's apply logic to religion. You have to remember that the founding fathers tried to make everything logical, and so they asked themselves the question, how was the universe created? It is illogical in their small minds to believe that the universe Big Bang. They had no concept of that. And their small minds could only conceive of the idea that, you have all this universe, the lion eats the antelope dies, or rather the lion dies, becomes the grass, the antelope eats the grass, circle of life, winds and storms and fall, spring, summer, and, nature works in harmony, and, and all these things, that this perfect world that operates, somebody had to design it. See, that's the thing. They said somebody has to design such a place. It had to have a supreme being that you just wrote down, a supreme being. And deists considered the universe as being created by this supreme being in what becomes known as the Clockmaker theory of the universe, which is on your test. What is the Clockmaker theory of the universe? The Clockmaker theory of the universe holds that the supreme being, or what in the Christian world people call God, in Islam they call Allah, in the Jewish world Yahweh, etc., etc., etc. The supreme being made the earth, and he made it to run. In other words, the lions eat the antelopes, the lion dies and becomes the grass, the lion eats the grass, circle of life, Simba, and all the other things that go on, storms, earthquakes, weather patterns, perfect harmony. That God created this like a clockmaker. I don't know if you've ever looked on the inside of an old clock. It's full of cogs and levers and gears, and everything works in harmony to tell time. And see, the deists said that's what God did with the universe. He created the world to run, the universe to run, the planets to go around each other, revolve, all things in harmony, like the workings of an old gear clock. And now here's the key part. The deist said after the supreme being, God, did all that, he wound the clock up, set it on the floor, and walked away. And there you have it. Now, how does that change? We'll get back to that idea in a second. Who said, crush the infamous thing? His name was Francois Aurier, but you know him as Voltaire, or rather, you better know him as Voltaire, Voltaire. Yes, and what was he talking about? He was talking about organized religion, that he said was encouraged slavery, that the organized religion that said that one man is greater or supreme to another, organized religion that held that certain people should live in bondage, others should not, that encouraged inequality, that encouraged superstition, that encouraged injustice, witch burnings, for example, discrimination, persecution of people who had different ideas about religion. And what Voltaire was talking about was organized religion, in particular, you're still writing, the Catholic Church. Ah, yes, the cult of the Supreme Being. The cult of the Supreme Being, going forward, the next major thing we're going to jump into is the French Revolution. And the cult of the Supreme Being was an attempt during the days of the French Revolution to create a church based on deism. Yeah, deism. The idea that God is really a clockmaker, that he sets the world up and then runs off and leaves it alone. And now we're still writing. Under deism, you have to, what does all that mean? Well, for example, would a deist spend lots of time praying, praying that God would help him, praying that for this, that, and the other thing? And the answer is no. Why? Because it's wasted time. God, he's doing something else. He's not here. He created the universe. The rest is up to you. Would a deist necessarily go to church or care about going to church? Wouldn't matter. No. Now, before you start throwing rocks at deists, here's something that you might find interesting. And I'm sure Mr. Arlinghouse already knows it. And that is this. You know some very famous deists. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Understand who, Mr. Horton? Oh, let's see. One of them was the founder of the University of Virginia. He was a farmer. He was the author of the Declaration of Independence, third president of the United States, purchaser of Louisiana. Yeah, that guy. And person who abused Sally Hemings for years and had several children with her. Yeah, that guy. He was a deist. Benjamin Franklin was an ardent deist. But let's get back to Jefferson. I'm sorry. Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was such an ardent deist that he originally wanted all references to God taken out of any government documents. Thomas Jefferson was such an ardent deist that, Thomas Jefferson kept his own personal Bible. And, you have to remember that the whole thing about the Age of Enlightenment is that everything has to make sense. Everything has to square with logic. And for Thomas Jefferson, if it didn't square with logic, it didn't exist. And so Thomas Jefferson took his Bible, his personal Bible, and trust me, Thomas Jefferson was a very learned man. He read everything he could get his hands on. And when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, he plagiarized it. Oh, did I say that? Yes, I did, because he did, but that's off the subject. I'm not a fan of Jefferson. But anyway, Thomas Jefferson, when he read through his Bible and he would come across something that was not in agreement with the ideas of logic, he would take one of these out and cut it out of his Bible. Now, your question, Mr. Arlinghouse, is if he did that, how much Bible did he have left? Not a lot, actually. But yeah, Thomas Jefferson was an ardent deist. Benjamin Franklin, also an ardent deist. In fact, Benjamin Franklin, when everybody else in Philadelphia was going to church on Sunday morning, Benjamin Franklin and some of his buddies would get together, go down to the local tavern. They knew the owner. They would get him to open up. And they, of course, would start drinking and talking about ideas. And they called this little org club they had the Hellfire Club, because they pretty much were blowing off the idea of going to hell and all this kind of things. And, they'd rather drink alcohol. And so quickly, we'll come back and visit the idea of deism later on. But yeah, Patrick Henry was a deist. There are some very ardent deists. John Adams, no. John Adams was a Puritan. So, who were these people? What were their contributions? They are to be looked up. Yeah. Zacharias Janssen, I believe, was the inventor of the microscope. Anton von Leeuwenhoek was the first person to see bacteria under a microscope. Evangelista Torricelli invented the barometer, which is good for measuring what, Mr. Arlinghouse? And by the way, these guys, there's a matching section on your test. for them and other inventors. Yes, the barometer measures air pressure, the weight of the air, very important when you're predicting weather. All weather is caused by differences in air pressure. Gabriel Fahrenheit, I can't imagine what he would have created, or Anders Celsius, either one. Galen once again assumed about the circulation of the human body was that once again blood was manufactured in the liver, pumped through the heart, and then consumed by the rest of the body. And yes, George Washington, how did he die? See, that's why I wish we had all you guys together. We went over that just today. George Washington died because, well, look it up. He died because he had a cold. And his doctors treated him by inducing diarrhea, which only dehydrated him, and then bled him not once but twice. And the year was 1799. Catherine the Great was also bled at her death, but that's another story. Catherine the Great had a stroke. They bled her thinking that would help her, and they also blistered her feet to try and wake her into consciousness. But she had a stroke. Her brain had shut down. Them bleeding her probably just hastened her death. But it was common treatment. Thank you, Galen. So Paracelsus, whose name meant greater than Celsius, changed his name from Philippus Aureolus von Hohenheim. He felt that illnesses were caused by chemical imbalances in certain organs that could be treated with the infusion of certain chemicals. Which, actually kind of sort of works. He was very argumentative and arrogant, and he was forced to spend most of his life wandering. Nobody liked him. And he said that like cures like. If you have a shortage of certain elements in your body, then you can add the element and balance the body. Andreas Vesalius wrote Structure of the Human Body. How was the study of human anatomy made so difficult during that time? Well, because the Roman Catholic Church had prohibitions against touching cadavers, dead bodies. Yeah, and so that made it difficult. And if you know, by the way, if you know anything about, if any of you guys are going to medical school, you study cadavers. In fact, most of you guys, if you take sometimes high school biology, they take you on a field trip and you look at the anatomy and physiology of an actual dead person. But during this time, it was considered necromancy. While he disagreed with Galen about blood being produced in the liver and consumed in the body, he did retain his ideas. William Harvey, though, he's the guy. William Harvey suggested and proved that blood circulates throughout the body. As it says there, unfortunately, George Washington's doctors failed to get the memo. Edward Jenner, yes, and smallpox. You see, the great killer of the last 20 centuries has been smallpox. Yeah. Edward Jenner will be the one who develops a vaccine for smallpox. They're actually, at one point in time in the 20th century, there was a belief that smallpox had been eradicated from the face of the earth. It has made a comeback. But you can thank Edward Jenner for that. Edward Jenner, interesting story. Edward Jenner, his town in England was beset by the smallpox. And Jenner came up with this interesting idea. He noticed that the women in the community, the cow maids, the milkmaids, who dealt with cattle, did not get smallpox, and because smallpox was deadly to most people, and it would leave ugly scars to those who survived. So Jenner noticed that these women, milkmaids, did not get the disease, and so what he did, but they would get cowpox, which is a much milder form of disease. And so, it would also have the pox, the little scars, the little sores. And so he sat there and thought, And what he did, he tried an experiment. He actually went to those maids that had the cowpox, took a blade out and scratched their sores, and then intentionally scratched the body of a healthy young boy, a sick young boy who had smallpox in the early stages. And the boy developed antibodies. Of course, Edward Jenner didn't know what antibodies were. But yeah, the first vaccine. In fact, the word vaccine comes from the Latin word vaca. All right, Spanish guys, vaca, Spanish word for cow. Mm-hmm. Vaccination, vaca, cow. Chemistry comes from alchemy. We talked about this before. Alchemy is the pseudoscience of trying to turn common elements into gold. But now the father of chemistry, and I can't believe your chemistry teacher has not told you this already. His name, Antoine Lavoisier. Let me write that for you, because you need me to. Yes, Antoine Lavoisier, the father of chemistry. Oh, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do that. Yes. Interesting guy. That's more interesting. Antoine Lavoisier lived during the time of the French Revolution, lived during the time of the Reign of Terror. And it seems that during the Reign of Terror was a very dangerous time for anybody to be on one political side or the other. Well, he found himself on the wrong side of the argument during the Reign of Terror. Meaning that he had made the wrong enemies, and for one reason or another, he had been charged with treason to the state or whatever, and was sentenced to be guillotined, have his head cut off. And so the question came up during this time. The question was being debated during this time. This guillotine, is it a humane device? I mean, when you cut somebody's head off, is it true they don't feel any pain? Is it an instantaneous death? I mean, for example, when I was a kid, my mother used to make us fried chicken Sunday dinner. And I would watch her, and she'd go out back to the chicken house, snatch up a couple of roosters, whack off their heads with an axe, drop them on the ground, and their corpses would get up and run. I'm not lying, I saw it done. And it'd get about 20 feet away, something like that, before it'd fall over. Well, yeah. But now you say, that's their body, what about their head? Well, here's another story. And it's a true story because I saw it when I was a kid. It's amazing the things you learn in the country. One day, some of my cousins caught an alligator snapping turtle. And it's a big one, too. Alligator snapping turtle. And I'm going to tell you what, you don't want to touch an alligator snapping turtle. Them things, they deserve their name. Their bite can crush bone. And so, they caught it, and we were going to make dinner out of it. And so when they went, to get it, cut dinner, make dinner. And I'm gonna tell you what, me, I'm a curious kid, and while we had that thing in captivity, we had it in kind of a cylinder, kind of a drum thing, and I just wanted to see. And so I took a pail, and I lowered the pail in front of this snapping turtle, and the snapping turtle went for it, bang, and of course scared me to death. But then I pulled up the pail, and there was a dent in that pail. I mean, this alligator snapping turtle is not to be messed with. And so, yeah, we were gonna, the older people were gonna cook it up and eat it. And so, of course, they cut its head off. And of course, they said, "Don't get around that head." And this was several minutes. And I remember me and my cousin went there. We took a stick, put it in front of this severed head, and it bit the stick and clamped down on it. So the point of the matter is, what does this have to do with Antoine Lavoisier? The question had come up, does a person die instantly when you cut off his head? No matter how. And so, since Lavoisier was going to die anyway, and being a scientist, and this was the age of reason, Lavoisier decides to do an experiment. He has his friend stand in front of the guillotine, literally, and have his hands like this, right under his head. And so that when the blade went down, severing his head from his body, his friend would catch his head. And the agreement was that his friend would count the number of times that Lavoisier blinked. Because, of course, he couldn't say, hey, I'm still alive here. Count the number of times that Lavoisier blinked. And 14. Yeah. So was he dead? Or was that just the light shorting out like, when the Titanic sank? I don't know. He didn't say. All right, so back to the matter at hand. According to a recent discussion in modern European history, women had a role in early developments of science and research. I'm all for the cause, guys, but be honest, once again, women were pushed into the corner. In fact, now you can write this down. In fact, the one thing that does the most for the cause of women is World War II. World War II will get women out of the kitchen and into the world. I mean, yeah, they make small moves, small advancements here, but yeah, by and large, women need not apply. What was it that Pericles said about a good wife? A good wife is one about whom you hear nothing at all. And that's pretty much the attitude lots of people went forward with. But anyway, of course, it has to be admitted that women were roundly ignored in the grand scheme of things, even academic circles. Few women who did take advantage of the meager opportunities offered to them were always women from wealthy families. The Royal Society even excluded the great researcher Margaret Cavendish, but she was allowed to attend one meeting. And by the way, the Royal Society, today we call that the National Geographic Society, and it's become international. It began in Great Britain. It's called the Royal Society there. But they invited her to attend a meeting, and like I said, I'm sure she was thrilled. And I'm being facetious and mean. It's terrible. Lady Cavendish did write observations upon experimental philosophy and the grounds of natural philosophy, which was a bestseller. Not. I'm being facetious and mean again. It's quite true. It is worth mentioning, however, that during the years of 1650 to 1710, 1/7 of German astronomers were women. That's probably due to the mystic crackpot aura attached to the cunning art of astronomy. In other words, astronomy and astronomers were looked upon as almost witchcraft. Now, this woman, Maria Marian, actually did gain some acclaim. She was a Dutch woman who studied entomology, insects. And I hate that life. She traveled to Dutch Suriname to study and categorize insects before she wrote her book, Metamorphosis of the Insects of Suriname. A page turner if I ever heard one. But she was given, it was great acclaim. Maria Winkelmann, a self-taught astronomer, was denied a position as the assistant astronomer at the Berlin Academy because she was a woman with no university degree. Yes. What is the Croix de Femme? Croix de Femme, forgive me, was the argument about the role of women in society. Yeah, there it is. That was, the academic discussion: are women equal to men? It was called the Quarrels Defense. What did Vesalius and others who followed discern about the fitness of women for academia? Well, they were going to be scientific about it. What they did was they took the skeletal remains of a woman, placed it next to the skeletal remains of a man, and said, oh, look, the woman's skull is smaller, therefore she doesn't have as much brain capacity. Oh, look, the woman's skeletal bone structure is smaller, therefore she doesn't have the strength. Therefore, women are inferior to men. Now, the problem with this kind of research is that the researchers in doing this, they already had presupposed the outcome. As a scientist, as a researcher, and you want to have a question answered, you cannot begin with the answer that you want to get as your starting point. And these guys, including Vesalius here, these Enlightenment thinkers, they had the answer they wanted. They just wanted to find what appeared to be a logical path to get there. They gave themselves the answer before they researched the questions. And so they said, oh, look, women have smaller heads, not as smart, smaller bodies, not as strong, and inferior. Research is inferior. Overall, the scientific revolution, this is a question on your test. And I've seen it before on AP Euro exams. The scientific revolution reaffirmed the idea that women were inferior. The scientific revolution, which you would think would have looked at all things equitable, but instead it reaffirmed the idea that women were inferior to men, an idea they wanted in the beginning, they assumed in the beginning, and they do the same thing to people who are of non-white races. Oh yes, look at this quote. An educated woman is like a gun one shows to a collector. Rare but has no use at all. Why don't we start with Roman numeral 13 tomorrow? And I will record a couple of days tomorrow because I can't believe I let myself get so far behind. And so, like I said, you live and learn about this thing called Canvas. I thought I was going to have an easy 2 weeks, but I can't use my recordings from another computer. Live and learn. Bye for now.